The storm came out of nowhere. One moment the sea had been calm, lapping gently against the hull of the Artemis. The next, a wall of black clouds had swallowed the horizon, and the world had turned into a heaving chaos of wind and rain. Jonas held the wheel with white-knuckled hands, shouting orders to a crew that could barely hear him over the shrieking gale. The schooner tossed like a toy in the monstrous waves, the mast creaking ominously with every shuddering impact. Lightning ripped the sky apart, illuminating a world gone mad. Sails torn to ribbons, ropes snapping like gunfire, men sliding. Across the rain-slicked deck, they never stood a chance. A wave the size of a building loomed ahead, shimmering with the electric light of the storm. Jonas barely had time to brace before it struck. The Artemis didn't break apart immediately. It held, groaning, as the wave lifted it high into the air, higher than Jonas thought possible, before dropping it like a stone. The deck splintered beneath his feet. The wheel was torn from his hands. The world spun wildly, a blur of sky, sea and wood. And then he was underwater, crushed by a weight he couldn't fight. He kicked blindly, lungs burning, desperate for air. Something brushed his leg. A rope? A piece of wreckage. And he grabbed hold, pulling himself upward. He broke the surface with a gasp, coughing up seawater, blinking through the stinging rain. The Artemis was gone. Only scattered debris remained, planks, barrels, a few bobbing. Crates, all being sucked under by the furious sea. Jonas spotted a shape nearby, a lifeboat half submerged, its wooden frame splintered but still afloat. He swam for it, muscles screaming. Twice he thought he wouldn't make it, dragged under by the pull of the wreck. But somehow he reached the boat, hauling himself over the side and collapsing inside. He lay there gasping as the storm raged on. The rain pounding down like bullets. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time lost all meaning. Eventually the storm spent itself, the wind dying to a whimper, the clouds bleeding away to reveal a blood-red sunset. The sea calmed. The wreckage settled. Jonas sat up slowly, muscles aching, and took stock. The lifeboat was barely seaworthy. Cracked, leaking, missing oars, but it floated. There was a broken crate jammed under one bench. Inside, he found a handful of supplies, a canteen of water, a few soggy rations, a flare gun with a single flare, and a coil of rope. Not much, but it would have to be enough. He looked around, but saw no other survivors, just endless empty ocean, and then movement. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of something. A shape slipping beneath the waves. Large, dark, gone before he could focus on it. A shiver ran down his spine, but he told himself it was nothing, a trick of the light, his imagination raw and frayed from the storm. There were sharks out here, sure, but they didn't usually bother with boats. He lay back, letting the exhaustion drag him under, and slept. The first night was a blur of fevered dreams, storms that never ended, the faces of drowned men staring up at him from beneath the waves. He woke at dawn, throat parched, stomach cramping with hunger. The water was gone, drained, or lost in the chaos, and he forced down a few mouthfuls of the soggy rations. Gagging on the taste, the sun blazed overhead, merciless. By midday, he was hallucinating, seeing islands that vanished when he blinked, hearing voices whispering from the depths. On the second night, it came again, the feeling, the certainty that he wasn't alone. At first, it was just a shadow flickering under the raft, then the sound of something scraping against the wood. Faint, deliberate. Jonas sat bolt upright, heart hammering. He peered over the side, but the water was dark, empty. Nothing there. He told himself it was the boat settling, creaking from the damage. He told himself a lot of things. They didn't help. By the fourth day, he knew something was following him. It wasn't a shark. Sharks didn't act like this. Whatever it was intelligent, patient. He began to hear it at night. Soft tapping sounds against the hull, rhythmic and deliberate, like a message he couldn't understand. Sometimes he thought he saw fingers, long, pale fingers, curling over the edge of the raft before slipping away. He stopped sleeping. By the seventh day, his mind was unraveling. His skin was blistered from the sun, his lips cracked and bleeding. The water was long gone, the food reduced to crumbs. He rationed the flare gun, telling himself he had to save it for the right moment, when he saw a ship or land, but no ships came. No land appeared, only endless, pitiless ocean and the thing beneath him, watching, waiting. He tried talking to it once. He didn't remember doing it, only realized afterward when he heard his own cracked voice babbling to the empty sea, begging, pleading, promising anything for a rescue. That night it touched him. He felt it, cold fingers brushing his ankle as he dangled his legs over the side, too weak to care. He jerked away with a strangled cry, crawling to the center of the raft. Clutching the flare gun like a child with a favorite toy, the thing didn't pursue him. Not yet. It was still playing with him, drawing it out. He realized, with a sick certainty, that it didn't want to kill him. It wanted him to choose, to give up, to offer himself willingly. The thought made him shudder, but he understood it in some deep, primal part of his brain. Predators sometimes preferred their prey to submit. It was cleaner that way, easier. He didn't know if it was animal, spirit, or something worse. He only knew it was patient, and it was winning. By the 12th day, he was ready to jump overboard just to end it. Every bone in his body ached. Every breath was agony. The sun had bleached the world into a blinding white void, and he could barely see. His skin was cracked and bleeding, strips peeling away from his arms. His tongue was a swollen lump in his mouth. He lay at the bottom of the raft, delirious, waiting to die, waiting for it to come. And it did. Not at night, but in the blazing light of day. It rose from the water like a nightmare made flesh, tall, thin, with limbs too long and joints that bent the wrong way. Its skin was translucent, stretched over bones like wet paper. Its face was a blank oval, featureless except for a wide, lipless mouth that split open in a grotesque smile. It crawled onto the raft without a sound, water streaming from its body. It loomed over him, casting a blessed shadow. Jonas tried to scream, but his throat was too dry. The creature tilted its head, studying him, waiting, inviting. Jonas raised the flare gun with trembling hands. The creature didn't move. It seemed almost amused. He hesitated. If he fired, he might waste his only chance at rescue. If he didn't, the creature knelt beside him. Its hand brushed his forehead, cold, feather-light, and for a moment he felt peace. Relief. It would be so easy to let go. So easy. He closed his eyes, ready to surrender. Then, in a flash of memory, he saw his sister's face, laughing, sunlit, alive, not dead, not lost, alive. He forced his eyes open, forced his shaking hand to aim the flare gun at the creature's featureless face, and fired. The flare exploded between them, a blinding burst of red light and heat. The creature screamed, a high, chittering sound that tore at Jonas's mind, and recoiled, flailing backward into the sea. Smoke and embers rained down around him. Jonas lay there, gasping, barely conscious. The world blurred, dimmed. When he woke, he was staring at a blue sky. Clean and empty, a ship loomed above him, a massive freighter. Voices shouted, ropes dropped, hands grabbed him, lifted him. He was too weak to resist, too weak to speak. The last thing he saw before passing out was a dark shape slipping beneath the waves, disappearing into the depths, smiling, waiting. He was rescued, saved, alive. But even as they bundled him into blankets, fed him water, murmured soothing words, Jonas knew the truth. It wasn't over. The thing was still out there, still waiting, and he had escaped not because he was strong, Not because he was lucky, but because it had let him go this time. He lay in the infirmary bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about the endless ocean stretching away on all sides, and wondered when it would come for him again. Because it would. It always did. Jonas woke to the soft hum of engines and the sharp scent of antiseptic. For a moment, he thought he was still dreaming. The bed beneath him was solid, unmoving. The walls were metal, the ceiling low. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright after so many days beneath the unfiltered sun. Pain radiated from every inch of his body. But it was a distant thing, dull and detached, like it was happening to someone else. A man appeared beside his bed, wearing a white coat and a weary smile. His face blurred and sharpened with each slow blink Jonas managed. "You're safe," the man said. "You're aboard the Northwind, freighter out of Singapore. We picked you up yesterday. You were lucky, friend, real lucky." Jonas tried to speak, but his throat was a strip of raw sandpaper. Only a dry croak escaped. The doctor, his name tag read Dr. Merrow, smiled again, softer this time. "Don't try to talk. Here." He pressed a cup of water into Jonas's hand. Jonas drank greedily, water spilling down his chin, not caring. How pathetic he looked. He drained the cup and sagged back against the pillows, exhausted. "You were badly dehydrated. Severe sun exposure, second-degree burns on most of your back and arms. Starvation, too. But you'll live," Dr. Merrow said, almost in wonder. "Frankly, you're a miracle." Miracle. Jonas closed his eyes. If they only knew. They thought the sea had been his enemy. They didn't know the truth. The enemy had a face, or rather, it didn't. It was faceless, smiling, and it was still out there, waiting. The doctor fussed over him a bit longer, checking IV lines, smoothing his blankets before retreating, promising to return later. Jonas was left alone with the hum of machinery and the slow lurch of the ship. He dozed. In dreams, he was back on the raft. The creature loomed over him, its mouth splitting wider and wider, swallowing the sky. He awoke. With a start, heart hammering. The room was dark now, illuminated only by the faint green glow of emergency lights along the floor. He sat up, wincing at the sharp pull of healing skin, and swung his legs over the side of the bed. Some deep instinct told him he needed to move. Now his bare feet hit the cold floor. He shuffled to the door, cracked it open. The corridor was empty, stretching away to darkness at either end. Only the low throb of the engines broke the silence. Jonas hesitated. Something felt wrong, a pressure in the air, like the heavy stillness before a storm. He stepped into the hall. The ship was huge, a floating city of metal and rust, but Jonas found he instinctively knew the way. Down 2 corridors, past the mess hall, up a short flight of stairs, toward the deck, toward the open sky. He didn't know why, only that he had to. He reached the deck doors and pushed them open. Cool night air hit him like a slap. The deck stretched out before him, empty and gleaming with dew. Above, the sky was a black canvas splattered with stars, the moon a thin silver blade. Jonas stepped out, breathing deeply. For a moment he felt almost normal, almost safe. Then he heard it. The tapping, faint, deliberate, from somewhere beneath his feet. His blood turned to ice. He spun, searching the shadows, but saw nothing, only the slow sway of the ship, the whisper of the sea. The tapping came again, 3 sharp raps, like knuckles on metal. Jonas backed away. "From the rail." "No," he whispered, his voice lost in the wind. "Not here, not now." But he knew it was useless. The thing hadn't been tied to the raft. It had been tied to him. He stumbled back inside, heart hammering, made it halfway down the hall before the wire. Lights flickered, once, twice, then died, plunging the corridor into darkness. Jonas froze. From the end of the hall, something moved, not walking, crawling, long, thin limbs scraping against the metal walls, a pale glint of skin, the flicker of an eyeless face. Jonas ran. He didn't think, didn't plan, he just ran. Down twisting corridors, past silent doors, past abandoned workstations. The ship was too big, too empty. He had no idea where he was going, only away. The tapping followed him, growing louder, faster, until it wasn't tapping anymore, but a furious drumming like 100 hands beating on the walls. He turned a corner and slammed into someone. Hands caught him, rough, real, and he screamed before he registered the human voice. "Hey! Hey, easy!" a man barked. Jonas blinked up into the face of a crewman, young and wide-eyed. "You okay, man? What the hell's going on?" Jonas tried to speak, but the words jammed in his throat. The tapping had stopped. The hallway behind him was empty, silent. He gripped the crewman's sleeve, desperate, but didn't know how to explain. How do you tell someone a thing from the deep had followed you aboard, that it wanted you to come back? The crewman helped him back to the infirmary, clucking like a worried hen, and deposited him into bed. "Stay put, all right? I'll go get the doc." Jonas nodded mutely. The crewman left, footsteps echoing away. Jonas lay back, staring at the ceiling. The lights flickered again. Just once, a single deliberate pulse, like a heartbeat. In the silence that followed, he heard it, a whisper from just under the bed. Not words, just breathing. Slow, patient. He squeezed his eyes shut, fists clenching the thin blanket. He had escaped the sea, but he hadn't escaped it. He never would. It was inside him now, waiting, watching, and sooner or later he would have to go back into the water, back where it belonged. And this time, it wouldn't let him go. Jonas didn't sleep. Even after the crewman returned with Dr. Merrow and a sedative burned its way into his veins, his body refused to rest. His mind was a storm of images, the endless stretch of the sea, the thing crawling across the raft, its skin slick and stretched, eyeless face twisting into something almost human, the slow tapping in the corridors, the whisper under his bed. He lay there, paralyzed, feeling the ship's pulse through the mattress, a slow, ponderous thudding, like a beating heart buried deep within the hull. The north wind was alive, or it would be soon. By morning, Jonas forced himself up. He refused breakfast, ignored the worried glances of the crew, and sat hunched on a bench near the infirmary doors, clutching a mug of cold coffee he didn't drink. He had to think, had to plan. Whatever had followed him off the raft, it was here now, and it was only a matter of time before it showed itself to the others. He couldn't let that happen. He had to warn them. He found the captain first, a thick-necked man named Anders, his voice a perpetual growl even when he wasn't. Angry, which seemed rare. Captain Anders listened to Jonas's story with the same expression he might give a drunk shouting about mermaids. Jonas tried to explain it logically. The knocking, the whispers, the thing crawling through the ship, but the more he spoke, the more ridiculous it sounded, even to himself. When he finished, Anders rubbed his face with a hand like a slab of meat and sighed. "Son, I get it. You've been through hell. You were. Out there too long, maybe cooked your brains a little. Seen things. Happens all the time to castaways. Hallucinations. Night terrors." "I'm not hallucinating," Jonas said through gritted teeth. Anders stared him down. "You're gonna rest. That's an order. You wander the ship telling ghost stories. You're gonna spook the crew. We're a week out from port. We don't need panic on top of everything else. But you don't understand," Jonas said. His voice cracked, thick with desperation. "It's here." Anders turned away. Conversation over. Jonas stood there a long time after. The captain left, fists clenched, throat burning with helplessness. He was on his own. Again. Hours passed. Jonas stayed near the infirmary, watching the slow rhythms of ship life around him. Crewmen moved like clockwork, checking instruments, tightening bolts, swabbing decks slick with salt spray. He envied their ignorance, envied their peace, but cracks were already forming. At lunch, a junior engineer stumbled into the galley, pale and trembling, insisting he'd heard something scratching inside the ventilation shafts above his bunk. Later, an older sailor burst into sickbay, claiming he'd seen a naked man crouching behind the cargo containers, grinning with teeth too sharp. Dr. Merrow sedated him too. The stories spread. Most blamed exhaustion, isolation, nothing new on a ship, this long at sea. But Jonas knew better. The thing was growing bolder. It didn't want just him anymore. It wanted the ship. By the second night, the north wind had changed. The halls seemed longer, the doors farther apart. Everything smelled faintly, of rot, a briny, sour scent that clung to clothes and hair no matter how many times you scrubbed. The lights flickered constantly now. Sometimes they went out entirely, leaving crewmen to grope their way through the darkness by memory, and always, always that sound. Faint tapping. Knuckles on metal. Jonas sat on the edge of his bunk, fully clothed, heart pounding in the silence. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't fight it, couldn't outrun it, but maybe, just maybe, he could trap it. He waited until the ship's clocks ticked over to midnight, the dead hour, when the boundary between the world of men and the world of things frayed thin. He slipped from his cabin, moving on bare feet to avoid the creaks that would betray him. The corridors were empty. He clutched the heavy coil of rope he'd found in a storage locker. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He made his way to the lower decks, the engine room, the belly of the ship. The air grew thicker the farther down he went, heavy with heat and the acrid sting of oil. The walls sweated moisture. The lights buzzed weakly, casting the corridor in a sickly yellow haze. He heard it before he saw it, breathing, wet, ragged, like lungs full of seawater. He rounded the corner, and there it was. The creature crouched against the far wall, half in shadow. Its body was longer now, stretched and distorted, ribs pressing against thin skin. Its mouth hung open in a soundless scream. It was wearing faces, dozens of them, pasted over its shifting flesh like masks, the faces of the crew, faces that twitched and wept and mouthed silent pleas for help. Jonas gagged. The thing shuddered and lifted its head. Blind sockets locking onto him, it remembered him, it smiled. Not with its mouth, with all the mouths. Jonas forced himself forward, step by step. He uncoiled the rope, hands slick with sweat. The creature hissed. The sound was like steam escaping a broken pipe. Jonas lunged. The rope struck the creature across the chest. It shrieked, a high, piercing sound that made Jonas's ears bleed. He wrapped the rope around it, yanking tight, ignoring the burning pain as the creature's skin bubbled and split. Where the rope touched it, the thing thrashed, the faces screaming in chorus. Jonas gritted his teeth and hauled it toward the hatch, toward the open sea. If he could just get it outside, the creature changed. Its flesh melted, reformed, a new shape, a shape he recognized. Sarah, her hair tangled, her dress shredded by wind. She reached out with trembling hands. "Jonas," she sobbed, "please help me." He faltered, just for a second, but that was all it needed. It surged forward, knocking him off balance. The rope slipped from his hands. The creature exploded into black mist, swirling around him, filling his mouth and nose. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He staggered backward, flailing blindly, and crashed against the hatch. His hand found the release lever. He yanked. The hatch screamed open. Seawater roared in, a living wall of blackness. It struck him like a hammer. The creature shrieked. Jonas grabbed the rope again and threw it into the churning water. The creature fought, clawing at him with hands that changed shape with every heartbeat. But the water was stronger. It pulled the creature out, dragged it down into the depths. Jonas slammed the hatch shut, panting, water streaming from his clothes. The engine room groaned, metal plates buckling under the sudden pressure change, but held. Silence, blessed silence. He collapsed against the wall, too weak to move. He had done it. For now, the ship was safe. He closed his eyes. In the distance, he thought he heard tapping, but it was just the engine, just the ship, alive and breathing, just like him. Barely. Jonas drifted through the following days like a man caught between two worlds. He ate when food was placed in front of him, slept in, snatches haunted by dreams of drowning, and listened, always listened, for the telltale sound of tapping in the walls. But it didn't come. Not right away. The ship carried on its path toward land. Each day they moved closer to port, closer to civilization, and with each mile of distance from the open ocean, Jonas allowed himself a fragile sliver of hope. Maybe it was over. Maybe he'd left it behind, tangled in the dark of the sea. And yet, something gnawed at him, something he couldn't explain. It was small at first, barely noticeable. The metal of the north wind felt softer somehow, as if the very structure of the ship was beginning to sag under an invisible weight. The hallways, once narrow but clean, seemed to bow outward slightly, as if breathing. The walls pulsed in the corner of his vision when he wasn't looking directly at them. The smell of salt and rot no longer clung just to the lower decks. It rose like a fog through the corridors, seeping into clothes, hair, and skin, no matter how many showers Jonas took. At night, lying in the infirmary bed, he could hear it. A faint heartbeat, slow, heavy. Not the engines, not the natural groaning of a ship strained by the sea, no. It was coming from the ship itself. Jonas kept to himself. The crew, relieved that the bizarre incidents had stopped, returned to normal routines. Their laughter drifted through the ship again. Poker games sprang up in the mess hall. Someone played an old guitar with rusty strings, crooning out rough sea shanties. They didn't notice the way the floors seemed to sag beneath their boots. They didn't feel the subtle tremor that shivered through the walls every few hours. They didn't hear the occasional low moan, as if the ship itself were sighing. But Jonas did. He noticed everything. The captain avoided him now, keeping their interactions terse and professional. Jonas didn't blame him. Who wanted to listen to the ravings of a half-mad castaway? But madness or not, Jonas knew. Whatever he had fought off that night had not truly been defeated. It had not simply been on the raft with him. It had become part of him. It had seen inside him, latched on, taken root, and now it had moved into the north wind. Jonas considered telling someone again, but what good would it do? Words wouldn't stop what was coming. He needed a plan. He needed a way off. This ship before it was too late. It was 3 days after the flooding of the engine room when the first real sign appeared. Scream, sharp, cut short. Jonas jerked upright in bed, heart pounding. It came again, muffled by distance, echoing through the steel bones of the ship. Without thinking, Jonas bolted from the infirmary, his bare feet slapping the cold floor, down corridors, past the mess, toward the cargo hold, where the scream had come from. He wasn't the only one. A handful of crewmen converged at the entrance to the hold, faces pale in the emergency lights. The big overheads had failed again, plunging half the ship into twilight gloom. Captain Anders arrived, furious and barking orders. "What happened?" he snapped. "Who screamed?" No one answered. Someone pointed. Inside the hold, between the stacked shipping containers, something moved. At first, Jonas thought it was a trick of the light, a shimmer, a ripple, like heat waves on asphalt. But no, something was there, something big, and it was watching them. Captain Anders barked a command, sending 2 men forward with flashlights. The beams cut through the gloom, slicing across the stacked containers, and Jonas recoiled. The wall, the back wall of the cargo hold, wasn't metal anymore. It was flesh, pale, pulsating, veined with thick dark lines like spiderwebs. The flesh shifted as the lights hit it, rippling as if disturbed by a breeze. The smell hit them then, a sour, putrid stench of rot and salt and something fouler. One of the crewmen dropped his flashlight. It clattered to the floor and spun wildly, sending crazy shadows leaping across the room. The wall quivered and opened, a mouth, a wide, gaping maw lined with rows of jagged teeth, dripping black ichor. Something slithered out. A hand, human-shaped, but wrong. Too many fingers, the joints bending the wrong way. It beckoned. Jonas turned and ran. He didn't care if the others followed, didn't care if the captain barked for him to stop. Some primal, screaming part of his brain had taken over. Get out! Get out! Get out! Back in the upper decks, Jonas ducked into a storage closet, slammed the door, and pressed his back against it, chest heaving. He squeezed his eyes shut. Images from the cargo hold burned behind his eyelids, the wall of flesh, the mouth, the beckoning hand. The North Wind was no longer a ship, it was a body. The thing he'd fought on the raft hadn't been some isolated entity, it was part of a larger organism, something vast and patient and old beyond comprehension, something that saw humans as tools, vessels, cells to consume and repurpose, and now, Jonas realized with creeping horror, it was finishing what it had started. It was digesting the North Wind. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Jonas lost track of time in the dark, clutching a rusted wrench like it would save him. When he finally dared to crack open the door, the corridor was silent, too silent. No footsteps, no hum of machinery, no voices. He crept out. The halls were different now. The walls, once solid steel, bulged and throbbed like veins under skin. The floor was slick, sticky underfoot. In some places the overhead lights had been replaced by bioluminescent patches, oozing a faint, sickly green glow. The North Wind was alive, truly alive. Jonas stumbled toward the deck. He had to find a way off. Escape pods, rafts, anything. He didn't care if he died trying. Anything was better than staying here, trapped inside a growing monster. The top deck, Jonas found a handful of survivors. A few crewmen, pale and wild-eyed. Captain Anders, his arm bloodied, shirt torn. They huddled together near the lifeboat davits. Fumbling with the release mechanisms, Jonas ran to them, relief crashing through him. Together, they could escape. Together, they could warn the world. As he approached, he slowed. Something was wrong. The captain turned toward him, smiled. His teeth were too sharp, his eyes too dark, too empty. One of the crewmen opened his mouth and black ichor spilled out, splattering the deck. Jonas stopped dead. They weren't survivors, not anymore. They were part of it now. Cells, extensions of the living ship. The captain took a step forward, then another, arms outstretched in mockery of welcome. Jonas turned and ran, heart jackhammering. Behind him, he heard their footsteps, steady, tireless, inhuman. The ship's heartbeat thundered louder and louder. The deck pitched and shifted underfoot like a great beast rolling in its sleep. Jonas ran blindly, down the gangways, through twisting corridors, past doors that led only to fleshy walls or yawning maws. He didn't know where he was going anymore. He just knew one thing. He had to get off this ship, or die trying. Because the North Wind wasn't a ship anymore. It was a graveyard. And it was still hungry. Jonas ran until his legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed against a door, shoulder slamming hard into the slick surface. For a terrifying moment, he thought the door might yield and open to some impossible flesh-lined cavern, but no, it was metal, still solid. For now. Chest heaving, he struggled to listen through the roaring of his blood. The footfalls behind him had stopped or hidden themselves, which was worse. He needed a plan, not just running. Running was how rabbits got caught. He needed to think. The ship had become something else, but not everywhere. Not yet. Some parts remained untouched. Metal, wires, human architecture. Maybe he could find the communications room. Maybe there was still a working radio, an emergency beacon, something to call for help before the thing finished absorbing the last of the ship. It was a desperate hope, but it was all he had. Jonas pushed away from the door, wiped the sweat from his brow, and forced his trembling legs to move. The corridors sloped downward. He didn't like it. Down meant deeper into the ship's gut. Down meant closer to whatever passed for the creature's heart. But every stairwell, every hallway leading up was blocked by walls of pulsing, veined flesh or by twisted metal grown over with slick black growths. Only down remained open. He followed the path laid out before him, steps slow, senses stretched to breaking. The ship had changed again. The walls wept a clear, viscous fluid that stank of salt and decay. The floor seemed to pulse gently underfoot, a long, slow rhythm that matched the heartbeat he heard echoing through the ship's bones. At intervals he passed things. Crew uniforms hung limp on skeletal frames. Some were half absorbed into the walls, faces frozen mid-scream, eyes hollow and empty. He didn't stop to look. Couldn't. If he did, if he allowed himself even a second to truly see, he knew he would fall apart. He had to stay moving. One foot in front of the other. Breathe, move, survive. The stairwell ended at a set of heavy double doors. Behind them, something waited. He knew it, felt it in his marrow. But there was no other path. He pressed his ear against the cold metal, a low, wet sound, like breathing through clogged lungs, echoed from the other side. Jonas swallowed hard, then pushed the door open. Darkness yawned before him, thick and choking. The faint green glow of bioluminescent patches offered enough light to see, but not enough to comfort. He stepped inside. The room was vast, bigger than it should have been. Bigger than the ship itself could possibly allow. The walls, if they could be called that, were made of writhing, pulsing tissue. Thick cords of vein and muscle crisscrossed the space, glistening wetly. At the center of the room stood a towering shape, the heart. It beat slowly, each pulse sending a visible tremor through the air, vibrating Jonas's very bones. It wasn't a heart, like any human's. It was a mass of twisted flesh, veins, and dripping ichor, with limbs and faces occasionally forming and dissolving back into its surface. Jonas gagged at the sight. He backed away, but something grabbed his ankle. Tendrils slick and cold as a dead fish. It wrapped around his leg and yanked. Jonas fell hard, his head slamming against the floor. Stars exploded behind his eyes. He kicked, clawed, screamed. Another tendril wrapped around his wrist, a third around his throat, dragging him closer to the heart. Faces formed on its surface, hundreds of them, mouths moving, whispering, pleading. Jonas fought with everything he had left. Twisting, he reached into his belt, found the emergency knife he'd scavenged earlier. He slashed wildly. The tendrils recoiled, spraying black ichor that hissed where it touched the floor. Jonas scrambled backward, slipping in the muck, gasping for air. He couldn't fight this thing, not head-on. He needed another way. His gaze darted around the chamber, pipes, steel beams, and there, above, the fuel lines. Big, industrial-grade hoses running to and from the ship's backup generators, still intact for now. A desperate plan formed in his mind. If he could rupture those lines, flood the chamber with fuel, and spark it, maybe he could kill it, or at least cripple it enough to escape. Jonas didn't allow himself time to think. Thinking was death. He moved, scrambling up the nearest maintenance ladder, hand over hand, ignoring the slick, pulsing walls that seemed to groan in protest. The heart roared behind him, a sound like 1,000 voices screaming at once. Tendrils lashed the air, barely missing him as he climbed. He reached the platform, grabbed a rusted wrench from an abandoned toolbox, and swung. Hard. The first blow dented the metal casing around the fuel line. The second split it. A fine mist of gasoline hissed into the air. The heart screamed. The tendrils writhed wildly, some reaching for the platform, others flailing at the walls. Jonas fumbled in his pocket, pulling out the old, battered lighter he'd taken from a dead crewman's body days ago. He flicked it. Once. Twice. The flame sputtered, almost went out. The tendrils found the base of the platform, started climbing. Jonas flicked the lighter again. Flame, small, precious. He stared at it for one heartbeat, then dropped it. The world erupted. Fire roared outward, a living beast of heat and light. Jonas was thrown backward by the blast, slamming into the far wall hard enough to drive the breath from his lungs. He lay there, stunned, as the heart shrieked and burned. The flesh walls blackened and cracked. The tendrils withered like worms on a hot plate. The ship itself shook violently, throwing him around like a rag doll. Through the roaring in his ears, Jonas heard something else, something new, the sound of tearing metal. The north wind was dying, and if he didn't move, he would die with it. Jonas forced himself upright, staggered. Toward the exit, flames licked at the walls now. The floor buckled and cracked. The heartbeat of the ship faltered, skipped, then stopped. Silence, deafening and absolute. Jonas stumbled into the corridor. The way up was clear now. The monster's death throes had torn open the passages. He climbed, through smoke and fire, through collapsing hallways and screaming. Metal. Finally, blessedly, he reached the top deck. The night sky stretched above him, vast and uncaring. The ocean boiled below, reflecting the burning wreckage. One lifeboat remained, barely hanging by a thread from its davits. Jonas ran for it, feet slipping on the blood-slicked deck. Behind him, the north wind gave one final shuddering groan and began to sink. Jonas leapt into the lifeboat, fumbling with the release. The cables snapped. The boat plummeted into the sea. Jonas hit the water, hard enough to see stars again. For a terrifying moment, he thought the ocean itself would grab him, drag him down into the burning, sinking corpse of the ship. But the lifeboat bobbed free, drifting, alone. Jonas collapsed inside, gasping, coughing, staring up at the endless stars. He had survived. Somehow. But as he lay there, listening to the hiss of the burning wreckage fading into the distance, he realized something. He wasn't alone in the lifeboat. Something shifted in the shadows at the far end. A shape, hunched and shivering, watching. Him with empty black eyes, the creature from the raft. It had never left. It had just been waiting, patient, smiling. Jonas closed his eyes, and this time he didn't dream of drowning. He dreamed of falling forever into a vast, hungry darkness. The creature watched him all night. Jonas didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Not with that thing crouched across from him in the lifeboat, swaying gently with the waves, its hollow eyes never blinking. Every time he shifted, it shifted. Every time he breathed, it seemed to breathe too. An awful mimicry of life. But it didn't attack, it just waited, as if it knew something Jonas didn't. The first light of dawn bled across the horizon, painting the water in bruised shades of purple and gold, and still the creature watched. Jonas sat with his back pressed against the side of the boat, one hand clutching a broken oar like a club. Useless, he knew. If it wanted to kill him, it could have done so 100 times already. But the primitive part of his brain demanded a weapon, demanded something to cling to in the face of the impossible. The sun rose, the world warmed, the endless ocean stretched. Around him in every direction, silent, empty. No ships, no birds, no land. Only the lifeboat, the sea, and the thing sharing the raft with him. Jonas licked his cracked lips, tasting salt. His tongue felt like leather. His stomach cramped with hunger, but worse was the thirst. A deep, gnawing need that scraped at his mind like sandpaper. The emergency supplies had burned with the north wind. There was nothing left. He needed water. Soon, or the sun would kill him faster than any monster. Hours passed. Jonas hallucinated, or thought he did. Land on the horizon. A ship's horn in the distance, a voice whispering his name, but every time he blinked, the visions vanished. The world remained mercilessly empty, except for the creature, still watching, still waiting. Jonas closed his eyes, just for a moment, just to rest them. When he opened them again, the creature was closer, sitting barely an arm's length away. It hadn't made a sound, hadn't rocked the boat, but there it was, close enough that Jonas could see the cracks in its skin, the fine network of black veins crawling just beneath the surface, close enough to smell the brine and rot leaking from its pores. He raised the oar weakly, but the creature only tilted its head, a strange, almost pitying gesture. Jonas's arm dropped. He didn't have the strength, didn't have the will. The creature reached out, slowly, gently. Its fingers, long, bone-thin, touched Jonas's forehead. A jolt of cold shot through him, as if he'd plunged headfirst into icy water. Memories flooded his mind. Memories that weren't his storms, shipwrecks, lifeboats adrift under pitiless stars, again and again, across centuries, across oceans. Sailors lost, survivors found, and always the creature watching, waiting, choosing. Jonas gasped, tearing himself away from the touch. The raft rocked violently. The creature withdrew its hand, watching him with an inscrutable expression. Somewhere, deep in the crumbling ruins of his mind, Jonas understood. It had been doing this for a long, long time, long before the north wind, long before Jonas was ever born. It wasn't a demon or a ghost or a monster in the way humans understood monsters. It was something older, something elemental, a spirit of shipwreck and survival, a judge of the drowned and the saved. And now Jonas had been chosen. For what? He didn't know. But it wouldn't be death. Not yet. Maybe something worse. The creature stood. The raft lurched, waves slapping hungrily at the sides. The thing pointed, one long finger extended toward the horizon. Jonas turned his head, squinting into the blinding light. There. Far. Away. A dark smudge against the gold of the sea. Land, real this time, or close enough. The creature stepped back to its place at the end of the boat, crouching once more, waiting, watching. Jonas began to paddle, weak, clumsy strokes with the broken oar, each movement a monumental effort, each breath a fight. But he paddled, because now he had a direction, a hope, even if it was only a cruel trick, even if the land turned out to be another nightmare. He had to move forward, had to try. The sun climbed. Higher. The raft baked. Jonas's skin blistered and peeled. His tongue swelled until it filled his mouth, but he kept paddling, and slowly, painfully, the smudge on the horizon grew. Details sharpened. Rocks, a stretch of beach, scraggly trees beyond. Real, real. Jonas sobbed, tears burning tracks down his filthy cheeks. He paddled harder, faster. The raft scraped against sand with a sound like tearing paper. Jonas collapsed forward onto the beach, his body screaming in agony. For a long time he just lay there, feeling the grit and heat of the earth beneath him, breathing, living. When he finally pushed himself up onto his hands and knees, the creature was still sitting in the raft, watching, waiting. Jonas met its hollow gaze. The understanding passed between them without words. You made it, but this is not the end. The creature would not follow him onto land. It never did. Its domain was the water, the shipwreck, the lost, but it would wait. It would always wait for the next ship, the next storm, the next desperate soul clinging to life against an indifferent sea. Jonas stumbled to his feet. The beach stretched before him. Wild, desolate, unfamiliar. Somewhere beyond the trees there might be help, or death, or worse, but it didn't matter. He had survived the raft, survived the creature. For now, Jonas turned his back on the ocean and the creature watched him go until he disappeared into the trees, until only the empty raft remained, rocking gently on the surf, waiting for the next storm. The trees swallowed Jonas whole. He stumbled through the dense, gnarled forest beyond the beach, each step an act of sheer willpower. His body protested, muscles locking, skin torn by brambles. But the worst was the thirst, gnawing at him like an animal inside his chest. The forest smelled of rot and salt. Thick vines hung low like nooses. Insects buzzed hungrily around his sweat-slicked face. Every few steps, Jonas glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the raft pulled up on the beach, the creature standing at the tree line. But the beach was empty now. The creature was gone. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it never really left. He pushed deeper into the woods. The canopy blocked out the sun, casting the world into a sickly green twilight. Strange calls echoed in the distance. Sharp, guttural sounds that made Jonas's skin crawl. He needed water, shelter, food. Basic survival instincts had kicked in, but they fought a losing battle against the creeping numbness taking over his mind. After what felt like hours, Jonas found a path, narrow, worn, winding through the trees like a scar. It didn't look natural. The earth was too smooth, the undergrowth too neatly parted. Like something or someone had walked it often. Maybe there were people here. Maybe he wasn't alone. The thought gave him a fragile sliver of hope. He followed the path. It led him to a clearing. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. He thought it was just a pile of debris washed up from the ocean. But then, he looked closer. Bones, hundreds of them, bleached white under the dim light. Human bones. Skulls grinned from the dirt, eye sockets gaping. Rib cages collapsed like broken cages. Long bones jutted from the ground like stakes, a graveyard, an ossuary, a warning. Jonas staggered back, bile rising in his throat. Too many bones, too many bodies. This wasn't just a few unfortunate souls. This was a history of death, a pattern, shipwreck after shipwreck, survivor after survivor, all ending the same way.